This war was a distant reality. For others, it hit closer to home. But for hundreds of unsuspecting Newfoundlanders, the war took place on their front doorstep, with disastrous results.
Canada's involvement in the Second World War is something that will always be remembered with great pride. And although most of what is remembered is of battles in distant lands, there were still a number of savage actions that took place around our own shores. Two such incidents happened right here in Conception Bay, Newfoundland. And beneath these seas now lay the silent remains of 4 Allied ships and the crews that once sailed upon them.
Several decades later, Canadian waters are once again peaceful. But I can still remember the horror of war, seemingly locked in time in the frozen artifacts along Newfoundland's coast. As a child born during the height of World War II in England, my first memories were the sounds of bombs bursting in the black of night over the skies of London. But while the opposition terrorized the heart of my birthland, they were also insidiously trespassing my future home of Canada. Below the cliffs of Conception Bay, a German submarine slipped through, ironically too close to be hit by weapons designed to reach enemy ships further offshore. In one of the numerous offensive actions that North America would see during the war, 4 cargo ships were sunk while resting at anchor. And it is here that I would look to find evidence of life after death. Several years later, I had the opportunity to explore the war-torn wreck sites firsthand and study the ways in which these wrecks were forming the basis for an artificial reef community. In over 30 years of working with the sea, I have dived on hundreds of shipwrecks worldwide. From the Dunraven, the Red Sea, to the Ayakoko Maru in Micronesia, from the Windjammer in the Caribbean to the Emperor of Lake Superior. No wreck has evoked more emotion than that which I feel for these wrecks lost in Canadian waters, including the ore carrier PLM-27 and a similar ship, the Rose Castle. Both ships took with them to their graves dozens of men. But the demise of these ships would hopefully spell the beginnings of new life in the form of artificial reefs, where young marine growth could find a new home. My plan was to study the effect in this cold environment where underwater ecosystems stand worlds apart from their tropical cousins.
swim fast.
But diving on wrecks such as these, in fairly deep water with temperatures near freezing, does not come without its dangers. Although I've worked in colder water in the Arctic and am familiar with its mind-numbing effects, one can never escape the threat of nitrogen narcosis, a silent, deadly force that can sneak up on an unwary diver who is breathing compressed air at depth. But on our first dive to the site of the Rose Castle, any thoughts of danger were quickly overshadowed by the splendor of such a bittersweet wreck. Virtually intact, she lay at the bottom of the bay in over 40 meters of water. It was as if time had stopped. But with the cries of her drowning men long since silenced, this wreck now serves as a living museum of a tragedy that I hope will never be repeated. On November the 7th, 1942, the Rose Castle was waiting to be loaded with a supply of raw materials to be used in England's war effort overseas. But at 2:33 a.m., without any warning, a torpedo blasted a massive hole in her hull and sealed her fate forever. 15 men escaped, but the others did not, and the ship with her cargo went straight to the bottom. As a man of the sea, I could understand the fear these men must have felt. At best, a ship is an efficient form of transportation. At worst, it is a vulnerable target of war. This discovery of the radio room was unnerving for me, with echoes of what must have been its last messages left ringing in my ears. At a cemetery overlooking Conception Bay, I was reminded of Canada's wartime history. Since Confederation in 1867, this country has been a peacekeeping nation and has rarely fired an angry shot from its shores. But being a land surrounded by 3 oceans, we might even be considered lucky for not having been open to further attack. And we should be proud of the men and women who dedicated themselves to preserving our freedom and the way of life we now enjoy. Nevertheless, we should never allow our waters to be a field for man's battles, for beside the human loss, nature too suffers badly from the impact of war. It is my hope that by developing a better understanding and appreciation for our seas, that future generations will enjoy and respect our oceans and prevent further tragedies on our waters from ever happening again. One of the other wrecks we found in Conception Bay was the PLM-27, another transport awaiting its cargo. An eerie sight, this ship still carried the tracks used to move ore carts. Although becoming rapidly overgrown, we could still make out the stern gun, ironically more useful underwater as an artificial reef than it was that fateful night many decades ago. It was here that we began a study into the value of cold water wrecks as artificial reefs. In places such as this, where temperatures hover just above freezing, the type of life and the rate of growth is much smaller than that found in warmer waters. So here, it could be decades before a wreck would show any signs of success as an artificial reef. By photographing known sections of this wreck, we could return years later to make comparisons of such areas and determine whether any substantial growth had taken place in the interim. If that turned out to be the case, it would show that this artificial reef had developed into what would hopefully be the new home for a wide variety of creatures. That would be an encouraging sign, and proof that even in this corner of Canada, where man and nature are constantly challenged, tragedy can sometimes be followed with a new lease on life. Wrecks in Canadian waters are unique in that the primary type of growth is in the form of algae and anemones. This is quite different from what we normally see in the warmer waters of tropical wrecks, like the Andro, a large steam yacht resting off the coast of Florida. Years ago, I helped in the intentional sinking of this vessel as part of an artificial reef program. Although coral and algae help form the basis of the food chain here, in a relatively short period of time, the wreck became heavily populated with the larger forms of marine life, the fishes. In tropical locations where natural reefs have been heavily depleted, artificial reef structures are continually proving to be successful in returning to those areas a wide variety of marine life. But I would like to think that northern artificial reefs also stand a chance for growth and development. I hope that a future trip back to the Newfoundland shipwrecks to measure changes in growth over a span of several years would help prove this. But first, I would find myself in a different corner of Newfoundland, paying a visit to an unusual Canadian shipwreck, one whose demise I was particularly glad to see. While awaiting a change of tides before heading out to our next wreck site, I was able to pause and greet some of Newfoundland's other natural attractions. But soon, we were ready to move on. Before long, we had another distraction. A giant iceberg, a common sight in these waters. As a diver, this was an opportunity that I did not want to miss.
But you want us at the end? Do you want me to? No,
These monstrosities, often equaling the size of a small island, can be a nightmare to shipping and a creator of wrecks themselves. But on this clear, bright day, this iceberg simply offered a chance for some spirited divers' fun. But another wreck awaited us. Wrapped in a mist-shrouded cove off a lonely corner of the island, it both drew us towards it, yet caused us to be taken aback. The questions it raised and the answers it held were only a few of its treasures.
All right, a minute. I don't want to keep her out too long. 4.5.
Not wanting to waste any time, we got fully suited and prepared for the dive. I wanted to find what this wreck was doing here and what sort of future it held. As we were quick to discover, this was once a whaling ship. I could be forgiven for feeling pleased that this was here. For although I have respect for men of the sea who must make a living, I have even more commitment to the preservation of some of nature's most fragile of creations, the great whales. Once hunted nearly to extinction, the many whales that visit Canada's shores have just recently begun to make a comeback. Perhaps it is situations such as these where images of uncontrolled slayings of our world's whales can be put to rest. But the case for preserving these wonderful animals can well be served. As an artificial reef, this wreck contains some basic disadvantages. For one, she lay mainly above water and is exposed to the harsh elements of the Newfoundland coast. Secondly, that part of her beneath the waves is in fairly shallow water, allowing fewer organisms to grasp hold and grow. Nevertheless, even in the shadow of the tiles upon which sat the containers used to boil down whale blubber, I found evidence of new life gaining a foothold to eventually flourish and prosper. Because of my dedication to Canada's waters, I have always made it a practice to learn as much as possible about the world that makes up our seas. Canada's maritime heritage is one that is constantly growing and changing. My hope is that someday I will be able to influence that change in such a way that it is for the better. Recently, I had the chance to add to my research by traveling, some 10 years later, back to the old World War II wreck sites off Newfoundland. Here, I hope to find fresh evidence of a flourishing artificial reef, where the wrecks of yesteryear would be a new haven of life. At first, it appeared to be a disappointment, barren, with little signs of life. But then, as if called by my presence, a clear sign that this wreck was alive made itself known. Fish, invertebrates, and other life forms abounded. In fact, this was turning out to be more than I expected. In the zones that we had previously recorded, it was quite apparent that the various types of marine growth and other life forms found here had nearly doubled. Although this was not at the level of abundance that can be found in tropical waters, it seemed to clearly prove that cold water artificial reefs can grow and prosper, and that they too can play an important role in attracting marine life to an otherwise desolate area. But then, an even more amazing sight. Humpback whales. As if to underline the diversity of life in this area, these ambassadors of the sea were for me a happy omen and a symbol of optimism. It was a fitting way to end this phase of my study of cold water shipwrecks as artificial reefs, and one that would leave me with a positive and bright feeling for the future of Canada's seas.
The shipwrecks of Conception Bay are a silent reminder to us all of the insanity that is war. As well, they show that even out of all this death and destruction, that nature, given a chance, can heal some of man's ugliest of wounds. Perhaps there is a lesson here for us all.
Washed by cold seas. These are the hunting grounds of the mighty humpback whale. But they're also the fishing grounds of Newfoundlanders. And the two hunters often unwittingly collide. Of all the animals that are to be found on this planet, none evoke more passion and controversy than the great whale. Some species, hunted to the very edge of extinction by man, were later saved by the public outrage against the slaughter. Today, these mighty creatures of the deep hold a special place in our hearts, and most are now protected worldwide.
But conflict between man and whale still occurs. But this time, neither are to blame.
Newfoundland's rocky, jagged coast is bathed on all sides by the wild and bountiful ocean. The Labrador Current brings Arctic waters around the island, rich in icebergs, plankton and fish. Fishing is a centuries-old way of life here and the mainstay of Newfoundland's economy. The coast is dotted with small fishing villages like the one I grew up in many years ago in England, and boats of all shapes and sizes daily brave the open seas. To me, Newfoundlanders possess a hardy, rugged spirit, best symbolized by these kittiwakes, who build their nests on a mere few centimeters of exposed rock. I come here every year to observe the magnificent humpback whales who migrate from their breeding grounds in the Caribbean to the cold waters of Canada to feed on a tiny silvery fish known as capelin. These fish school in large numbers close to shore, where they spawn in the surf line. The whales follow them in. But cod feed on capelin too, so nets are strung out along the shoreline by the fishermen to catch the larger fish. These nets act like a veritable minefield for the feeding whales, and many inevitably get trapped in them. But though my concerns may be with the whale, I sympathize with the problems faced by the fishermen too. I shared in their way of life as a small boy. I respect the fishermen's rigorous work, and I have a great appreciation for the hardships faced by these men of the sea. But fishing nets can present a serious problem for humpbacks, for when the whale's attention is focused on gulping down great mouthfuls of capelin, they often fail to see the nets and blunder into them. The cost to fishermen is enormous. Thousands of dollars in damaged nets, millions of dollars in fish revenues, time wasted, and tempers lost. Some years ago, I had an opportunity to help free a trapped whale with a local whale specialist, Dr. Peter Beamish. The whale was entangled in ropes holding a cod trap and was fighting to get to the surface to breathe. When the humpback came up, Peter would try to push the net off its back, while below the water, I was trying to cut the numerous ropes holding the animal. It was a difficult and dangerous task, for at any moment the whale might have panicked and made the situation even worse. But with coordinated efforts, we were subsequently able to both free the whale and save most of the fishing net. Though the whale was exhausted by its struggles, it soon recovered and swam out to the freedom of the open sea. Seabirds too wait for the arrival of the capelin. Birds know days in advance when the capelin are coming in to spawn and wait patiently on the beach for them to appear. never fails to amaze me that such a tiny, unassuming fish can bring together seabirds, whales, cod, and man. And I always wonder if it makes any sense to be fishing a creature so vital to the food webs of so many species. Indirectly, this little fish also brings tourists who come to see the whales. Peter Beamish runs whale watching tours, hoping that educating the public about these marvellous animals will foster more willingness to protect them. I often travel with Peter and enjoy being with people when they see a whale for the first time. Of the sea do not seem to mind the presence of people and allow us very close contact with them. Indeed, whales are our closest seagoing relatives, warm-blooded creatures like ourselves who give birth to our young. Mammals who have evolved from a dog-like ancestor who returned to the sea some 60 million years ago. Water is the only environment that can support the massive weight of the great whales, 40 tons for a humpback, and as much as 100 tons for a blue whale. With a white pectoral fin as long as my dining room table, the whale's large size actually helped them conserve body heat. I'm always in awe of these gigantic animals, and I feel almost privileged to be able to film them at such close range. Years ago, humpbacks were hunted nearly to extinction to make gland oil, corsets and cosmetics. But now that they have protection, their numbers are beginning to increase. As I watch them surfacing about Peter's boat, I think perhaps the human race is ready for a whole new relationship with whales, and indeed with all the wild animals which grace this planet. If we can take the time to learn from them, perhaps they can teach us more about the magic and the mystery of the world that exists beneath the sea. I'm always at peace while watching whales. But when they swim close to the inshore fishing nets, I'm concerned for their safety. As we've seen time and time again, it is so easy for a humpback whale to find itself entangled in a life and death struggle in some unfortunate fisherman's gear. I am keenly aware of Newfoundland's dependence on the fishing industry. With little arable inshore land, these people rely almost solely on the sea for their livelihood. But more than this, Canada needs its Newfoundland fishermen to supply fish for a wide range of markets. I admire this rugged, independent kind of life, exposed to wind and tide, which has been the norm here for so long. When commercial fishing first began here, the seas were teeming with fish, and the average length of a cod caught was a giant 2.5 meters. Now, because of overfishing by all countries, cod stocks are declining. Far fewer fish are being caught, and those which are caught are small.
Well, then I'll just... New tank.
You just sit on the
New tank inside.
Put your hand into the stone somewhere, would you?
Like myself, today's fishermen can still remember the times when the harvest was abundant and life was good. The present fishing industry is a shadow of what it was in earlier days. Most of the fishermen recognize the problem as being overfishing, both inshore and offshore.
But you want us to...
Today, we see that sophisticated methods, including freezer ships and high-tech tracking equipment, have been continuously employed to harass almost to the edge of extinction already exhausted and depleted stocks. The Canadian government is attempting to solve this problem with a long-term moratorium on the taking of schooling fish, such as cod and capelin, which will hopefully give the whole ecosystem a chance to recover. Sadly, all of modern man's sophisticated technology cannot compensate for the lack of fish in the sea. The moratorium will also hopefully give pause to the situation, which is bringing fishermen and whales into conflict. Unfortunately, the minke whale is another species which often blunders into fishing nets. I am always saddened at the waste of such a beautiful creature. This unfortunate animal was caught in one such net and drowned. When a whale dies in this way, it takes much of the net with it, a loss the fishermen can ill afford, especially in hard economic times. I have to ask myself, how can such net deaths be prevented? How can the whales competing with fishermen for the same fish be kept away? And how can the needs of all creatures to eat be harmonized? I have spent much time pondering the problems faced by all creatures here that depend upon the sea for their livelihood, and it seems sad to me that we cannot find a simple means to keep whales out of fishing nets. One solution might be an effective underwater technology which could warn the whales away from the nets. Another possibility might be modified nets which could be readily taken apart by fishermen above water if entrapment does occur. But finally, we need to perfect techniques for getting entangled whales out. Yet another trapped whale. On this occasion, it was Peter Beamish and his group of whale watchers that came upon a humpback entangled in a fishing net. Peter, a recognized expert in whale entrapment, assessed the situation to see if he could free the animal himself. The whale was obviously terrified and struggling to the surface to breathe, attempting to disengage itself from the many ropes that held it. Time appeared to be running out for the animal. Peter decided to get a closer look at the situation. As always, this was potentially a very dangerous operation, for at any moment the whale might have panicked and flipped the dinghy over. On reaching it, Peter found that the animal had a number of ropes entangled around its tail, some 10 meters below the surface. This situation he could not resolve himself, but as he knew that I was working with diving equipment just a few kilometers away, he decided to enlist my assistance. was immediately apparent to me that this animal was in grave danger of drowning. The fishermen were concerned about the damage that might occur to their nets. I sensed the whale's fear and terror, which made it necessary to act all the more quickly. I realized that there was little time to waste, but I had to get an overview of the situation before I attempted to release the animal. I knew that I must win its trust and hoped it would accept me more readily if I were under the water with it. While surveying the situation, I could see that one of the ropes was wrapped around its head and running through its mouth. But the real problem was that there were a great number of ropes tangled round the animal's tail, making it almost impossible for the whale to move except to reach the surface to breathe. Concerned about the strong current and the many loose lines, any of which might entangle me during my efforts to release the animal. Having returned my camera to the boat, I now got down to the urgent work of releasing the whale. As I cut the first line, I was acutely aware of the morass of rope that was surrounding me, any one of which I too might have become entrapped by. But the whale almost seemed to be helping me, hardly moving as I cut again and again. 15 minutes later, I severed the last rope, and the animal was finally free. And it swam slowly off towards the open sea. Everyone was ecstatic. We had managed to save the life of a humpback whale, a member of a species that is already heavily endangered. Satisfaction was in the reward of knowing that this great animal was free again to roam the oceans and to sing its haunting song. Once in a while, we all contribute something special to life. This may have been my contribution. With the events of late fading into memory, the capelin have come in and spawned for the year. The gulls have had their fill, the fishermen have folded up their nets, and the whales have returned to the open seas. Hopefully, the moratorium on cod and capelin fishing will now give fishermen time to work with scientists in developing new ways to preserve the fish stocks and to prevent future conflicts between whales and men. Regardless, it will give fish stocks a chance to recover and perhaps give us all time to reflect on our personal roles as the guardians of all living things on this planet.
With a moratorium now in place on cod fishing off Newfoundland, the threat to the whale from inshore fishing nets is much reduced. Equally, with the work of men like Peter Beamish to educate and inform the general public about these wonderful creatures, hopefully one day man and whale will finally find a way to coexist together in peace and in harmony.
They loom like silent, deadly warnings, and yet they symbolize progress and adventure. They represent the sailor's nightmare and the dreamer's imagination. They are the shipwrecks of the Great Lakes, man's legacy to triumph and to tragedy.
Years ago, the Great Lakes served as a means by which man could first of all explore and later transport the fruits of his endeavors to other lands. Today, a vast network of crafts still ply the Great Lakes, but not without cost. Over the centuries, thousands of vessels have paid the ultimate price here, and now rest in their watery graves as grim reminders of the savage moods of these mighty inland seas.
The Great Lakes have long been recognized as the world's largest freshwater transportation system and prime catalyst around which evolved the industrial core of central Canada and the United States. But where these waters offered man new opportunities, they also destroyed lifelong dreams. Hundreds of these vessels sailed away into the unknown. Hundreds more lie about the lake's bottom, silent, forbidding reminders of nature's wrath and man's mistakes. Today, the ports where these ghost ships sailed from, or were destined to, are thriving testaments to the wide appeal maritime history enjoys in this part of Canada.
From our own experience on the reefs.
Here in the small town of Tobermory, on the shores of Lake Huron, I, like thousands of others, have used my regular visits here as a chance to investigate further the many tragedies forever frozen beneath these waves. Shipwrecks are like underwater scenes of a crime. Only here it is nature and not detectives that have ensured any clues to their mysteries still remain undisturbed. Whether these vessels were sunk through storms, fires or collisions is sometimes readily apparent, but not always. And as a non-renewable resource, it is essential that we learn everything that we can from them. My interest through the years has been in working to complete many of the stories that are still waiting to be fully written here, and in so doing, helping Canadians get a better insight into the gloom and the glory of their rich maritime heritage. In this pursuit, I am happy to say I am not alone. Fred Gregory is the head of SOS, otherwise known as Save Ontario Shipwrecks.
Fred is Executive Director for SOS. I presume you have probably more knowledge of the need for preservation of these shipwrecks than virtually anyone.
Well, John, it's something we've been working on for a number of years. We recognized back in the late 70s that Ontario holds one of the richest resources of inland marine heritage in the world, and we also have some of the finest shipwreck diving in North America.
I suppose, in a way, that the shipwrecks themselves could be looked upon as a non-renewable resource, because once they're gone forever.
Indeed they are. And we found that through mostly a system of education and involvement, and also placing a large amount of trust in the dive community, we have a great bunch of divers in this province who really take pride in what they have and want to protect it.
What groups like SOS and others want to protect is the largest concentration of shipwrecks to be found anywhere in the world. In just 100 years, well in excess of 5,000 wrecks have already been documented. These lakes provide the perfect underwater refrigerator, preserving wood and metal through both frigid temperatures and lack of salt content. Today, many of these wrecks are sanctuary to marine life. Yesterday, they were harbingers of hope to many thousands of people. That their dreams may have met an untimely fate never fails to provoke my imagination. What was life like then? What actually happened here? And what circumstances permitted these tragedies to occur? But before any details can be known about a vessel's demise, many weeks of research must be devoted to what condition or type of wreck has been left for present-day scrutiny. Today, with modern navigational technology, we are often permitted to view these waters as restful and invigorating. But it wasn't so long ago that navigation was mainly guesswork, and therefore potential disaster loomed everywhere. It is for this reason that no two of the lake's wrecks in these protected underwater parks are ever the same. Indeed, while some are little more than solitary anchors whose vessels have long since disappeared, other wrecks are entirely complete, and to the underwater visitor, much more complex. The Wetmore is one such example. It is the kind of ghost ship that humbles even the most experienced of divers. Its enormous bulk, crippled and scattered, speaks volumes about the lake's unpredictable force. As well, the Wetmore is rich with artifacts. Inevitably, the most telling and valuable items a silent wreck can offer any modern-day marine archaeologist. As someone who has spent his life with the sea, the immediate bond artifacts forge between the present and the past is sometimes disturbing. I know how fragile man is at the hands of nature, and therefore I often view wrecks as a little more than underwater graveyards. For me, personal artifacts are rarely a pleasant discovery. They merely confirm that the unknown dangers man faced then are the same dangers that I might face today. Whenever I am in Tobermory, I never fail to visit my longtime friend, Dr. George Harper, a specialist in one such danger called nitrogen narcosis. This debilitating state of confusion affects divers breathing compressed air at depth. As nitrogen builds in their system, so does confusion ensue.
Okay, we'll give the timing outside at time. You all set, right? Yeah. Okay, go.
To test our resistance, George was able to simulate working conditions at a depth of 60 meters,
Like that. That's right, yeah.
proving even the easiest of tests to be comically impossible and disturbing.
Believe yourself.
It proved at its very simplest that confusion of any sort while diving a deep wreck can be a potential killer. The wreck of the Arabia is unique to the Great Lakes, and it is one that I always return to. But despite the fact that she has been on the bottom for over 100 years, much of her still remains in fairly good condition. The challenge she poses divers today, however, is that she lays over 30 meters below the surface, where dive time is very limited and complete concentration is an absolute must. It is a tall order, proven ironically by the fact that though the Arabia's crew survived her sinking, she now marks the graves of several unfortunate divers. Yielding to nature's frigid grip, we are given, as always, mere moments to investigate this underwater legend. The Arabia was launched on Lake Ontario in 1853 and was soon carrying cargoes of all types between the major ports of the lower Great Lakes. Despite 2 or 3 misadventures, she was looked upon as a generally lucky ship. But on October the 5th, 1884, her luck changed forever, when with a cargo of 20,000 bushels of corn, she sank in a storm on Georgian Bay. Today, because of several divers' deaths, she has a very bad reputation. And yet, because she offers such a rare and remarkably detailed version of 19th century shipping, she is, for me, the very essence of why diving Great Lakes wrecks is so fascinating. For those who care, she is the ultimate find. For those who are careful, she is a well-earned reward. But for those who are careless, she is an ominous warning. In my experience, it seems that the Great Lakes wrecks that fascinate the public most are always those that involve some instance of human loss. I am reminded, however, of another lonely vessel that some years ago lived up to the same sort of shipwreck drama and fascination without ever once revealing a single detail about its sinking or identity. Unlike the Arabia, this wreck was a four-masted schooner that sank in Lake Superior. Archival evidence strongly suggested it to be the Mary McLaughlin, but only the bell or the registry number would confirm that officially, and they were nowhere to be found. Never in my experience has a ghost ship so lived up to its name. And to this day, I am both baffled and intrigued by the lack of the crucial pieces of evidence needed to identify. It was as though nature selectively chose to sweep them away, or even worse, an irresponsible diver removed them. Added to these problems, as always, we were facing extreme cold and poor visibility, just two more ways the lakes can cover up the things that we wanted to find. Fortunately, at least on land, nature cannot hide, and man cannot take all of the wonderful and mysterious sights to be found on the Great Lakes. Whenever we take a break from diving, we never fail to find rewards of a different kind. Afterwards, it's always a pleasure to return to work. Some years ago, I was invited to lend my assistance to research being done by members of Save Ontario Shipwrecks as they worked another wreck of Lake Superior, the massive steamer Rappahannock. By recording on film some of the first images ever to emerge from this intimidating vessel, whose length exceeds that of a football field, I was pleased to be part of the good work being done by SOS. Their determined and painstaking efforts to preserve wrecks like these is something I respect, as they prevent situations like the Mary McLaughlin from ever happening again. Today, the Rappahannock stands as the premier example of a vessel protected against the whims of nature and the irresponsibility of man. Her sunken chambers may look like an underwater ghost town, but thanks to SOS divers, no part of her has gone unmonitored or left to speculation. Even her most priceless artifacts are gently removed, examined, and returned to their final resting places. But my interest was immediately drawn to the ship's bell, always the most important artifact, for it clearly identifies a wreck by name, and once provided its signature sound. Wrecks like the Rappahannock benefit enormously from groups like SOS. But there are others, like the Emperor, that need much less protection. For rare is the diver who braves its extreme depths. This ore carrier, over 130 meters in length, ran aground in June of 1948, when conditions on the lake were said to have been absolutely perfect. Why a fairly modern vessel met such an ancient fate could be open to question, but in fact it was a simple error of navigation. Nonetheless, When diving on this devil of darkness, one could be forgiven for attributing its demise to much darker purposes. More than any wreck I have ever encountered, the Emperor received me with a foreboding chill. A sense that here I had finally overstepped the authority that 3 decades and hundreds of wreck dives had strengthened me with. At this extreme depth, the intimidation comes from the near-freezing cold, the unnerving darkness, and the fact that a dozen people died when this vessel went down. Even so, the wreck seems suspiciously undisturbed. The impulse to move forward is unavoidable. It was in the companionway and bunks that I sensed more than ever the presence of human loss. Here, I finally felt prevented from entering the Emperor further. And yet again, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Silent tombs like these often carry the weight of tragedy, but little of the evidence why they happened. The Great Lakes, as always, hide their secrets well. But then, moments later, I too fell victim to this haunted place. While decompressing to rid myself of the buildup of nitrogen that comes from deep diving, my mask inexplicably collapsed, forcing the lens into my face, a virtually unheard of occurrence. I could not help but wonder if this so-called haunted wreck was issuing me some kind of warning. Our next dive proved to me that it could well have been. For hidden in the darkness, I stumbled on the ghostly remains of one of the Emperor's long-lost crew members. The experience was disturbing, but out of respect for this fallen mariner, we decided to leave the wreck of the Emperor to those that still sail her, on a journey to we know not where.
Though the Great Lakes have taken many lives and ships over the years, today the dreadful toll has been much lessened. Some of this is due to the advances made in better weather forecasting, sophisticated navigation aids, and safer vessel design. But all that sail the Great Lakes are quick to point out that these mighty inland seas are very unforgiving, and just one mistake here could well be the very last any mariner will ever make.